Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The Greengrocer is a story about comparing ourselves to others. Greengrocers have a happy life, especially if they are the only ones in town. In a little town in North Africa, Zishan the greengrocer had his stall. He was in his late 30s now. He'd run this stall since his teenage years. He started out selling mangoes from his house to his fellow pupils at school. Shoppers and townspeople alike enjoyed his company. "Salams, my sisters! Many lovely apples here today. Please come and try this new variety." His voice was like a happy chirping bird, part of the furniture of noise in the small village of Barkat. He felt confident and good about himself. One spring, though, another young greengrocer named Habib opened up in the same market. Habib was driven and competent. Zishan started to make comparisons. He saw what he had been, and began to experience self-doubt, and felt inferior. With these doubts, his confidence diminished, and with it, his voice faltered. He was no longer as animated or as enthusiastic as before, no longer striking up conversations with the shoppers, and no longer happily drawing their eye. Not knowing what to do, he went to seek the advice of his older brother Musa, who was an imam in the nearby city. Zishan himself wanted to be an imam when he was younger, but in those days he was often too distracted to concentrate on his classes to become a hafiz. He was a very social kid, perhaps even too jolly for such a serious profession as an imam. He felt like a bit of a disappointment when sitting in the presence of his older brother. He found him at the beautiful central masjid, surrounded by young scholars, all taking turn asking questions. He felt even more inferior. But he asked his question: "Why am I feeling inferior? Why has my confidence gone? I've always been a brave and strong and competent man. When harvests were poor, I still came to market with what I had. When people had no money, I was able to survive by lowering my prices, and I've always just had enough. Why am I so intimidated and insecure compared to this young upstart Habib?" His brother looked over and replied, "Can you wait for a while, brother? When everyone else is gone, I will answer your questions." So Zishan sat and waited, and waited and waited. People flowed in and out all day, visiting his older brother, who dutifully listened and dispensed advice to them. "Why should I have to wait?" he found himself thinking. Zishan grew impatient for an answer, but still he waited. And as the evening approached, he eventually found himself alone with his brother in the masjid. "I've waited as you've asked. Everyone is gone. Can you please answer my question?" "Let's go out for a walk," replied Musa. When they left the masjid, Musa pointed at 2 palm trees growing side by side outside the masjid's pristine white marble wall. "Look at those trees. Allah made them different in their own way. One is a date palm, bearing fruit just like the goods you see at your stall. And the other is a traveler palm, which grows in a fan shape, and always the fan faces east to west. It's a guide for someone who is lost. Each tree has its own beauty, its own particular preferred soil, its own requirement of water. However, you will notice that this date palm is taller. When I first came to this masjid as a young imam, these trees were barely a foot high. I've seen them grow daily. They share the same space, and I have never seen them be in argument with each other. One never asks the other, 'Why can't I be more like you?' Now tell me, Zishan, why do you think they don't fight?" "Well, I'm not a child, you know," said Zishan. "Trees don't argue. They don't feel insecure. They don't compare themselves to one another. They each have their own growing to do, and that's that." Musa then looked over at his brother and said, "So tell me again what you have come to ask me?" Suddenly, Zishan indeed felt like a child. He had answered his own question. His brother smiled at him. Don't be embarrassed, young brother. You need to see when competition is no good for you. It is part of our lot as human beings to compete, to vie for superiority. This is part of our nafs, our survival instinct. But it can get a little carried away. What were you most afraid of? I feared Habib would outsell me and take my customers. And did that happen? No, not really. In fact, more people came to the market because the whole place was growing. But I still feel nervous, brother. I don't talk to the customers as much as I used to. Well, do you feel nervous when you first opened your stall a few years back? Yes, I felt very nervous when I opened. I channeled it into my friendly greengrocer thing. That's how I got round my nerves. So, a little bit of nerves contributed to your success. Too much made you dull. Yes, well, if you put it that way, I suppose so. Well, subhanallah, I guess things are exactly as Allah intended. This story, again inspired by my latest book, Tharwatul Qalb, is about how we deal with understanding our anxieties and how Islam teaches us to balance these things. We have drives within us, and those drives are useful because they help us to grow, but sometimes they can become a little bit too enthusiastic and they drag us along with them, and that's when we get tense. If you get to know yourself, you realize that actually it's not about suppressing anything, it's about living with it and being sympathetic to yourself. I look forward to making another video for you, inshallah. Wassalam.